Berlin was supposed to be split by concrete and rifles, yet the deepest fracture ran straight through men like me. I spent 1962 patrolling that crack, trading silence for survival. They said we were guardians of freedom. I kept receipts of favors. Number flag would claim. You wouldn't believe me if I told you how many secrets fit inside a single cigarette lighter. Tonight, the lighter is dead. My hands shake, but the memory refuses to dim. An unsigned cable ordered me to intercept a Soviet defector on Glienicke Bridge, the kind of operation that could tilt the whole stalemate. I met him, looked into eyes already halfway to freedom, and let him walk. I'm not proud of it, but it's what had to be done. Or so I convinced myself. People think espionage is about catching spies. Sometimes the most damaging capture is the one you never make. Maybe I was just a pawn too, but pawns get to choose one square. This story is that square, and the truth hiding beneath it. Before I regret saying any of this, hit like, subscribe if discomfort suits you, and tell me what city you're listening from, and what time it is now. They woke me with a knock that didn't wait for permission. 2 MPs at the door, no names, no salutes. One handed me a slip of paper, the kind that burns too fast for anyone to trace. I didn't need to read it twice. Glienicke Bridge. 2:40. Package inbound. No contact. Intercept, confirm, report. No signature. No room for questions. I dressed like I always did on nights, like that layer's thin enough to run, thick enough to bleed in. The drive across Berlin was a quiet blur, headlights bouncing off crumbling stone and frostbitten wire. The bridge stood like a scar between worlds, lights dimmed, guarded on both ends, but watched from above by ghosts we didn't aim. I waited on the American side, gloves in my pocket, heart ticking like a faulty metronome. 2 figures moved on. The horizon one stayed behind. The other walked, slowly, alone. He wasn't tall, wore a dark coat, and held a leather suitcase like it had weight beyond documents. My cue was simple: intercept, confirm. But as he stepped into the halo of the bridge light, he didn't flinch. He smiled, not the desperate grin of a defector something. Colder, familiar, like he already knew me. I raised my hand. "You're late," he replied in perfect, accentless English. "No, you're early." I paused. That wasn't part of the script. There was no script. That smile, that tone. It hit a nerve I didn't know was still exposed. The briefcase stayed in his hand. We locked eyes, and in that frozen second, I broke protocol. I let the silence stretch. He stepped past me, slow as a funeral march, and I didn't stop him. Back. In the safe house, I made the call. Standard code. Negative contact. Bridge compromised. Possible decoy. I lied, not to protect him. Not to protect the mission. I just didn't know why I hesitated. Still don't. Langley's reply came hours later. Proceed with fallback protocol. Debrief at 0600, but they didn't ask what happened. They never do when silence costs less than truth. I sat on the floor of that cold flat, coat still on, boots leaving damp prints on the tile. I played that moment over and over. Not the smile, not the voice, the sentence, "You're early." Like he'd been waiting for me. Like he'd seen this play out before. That's when I remembered something old. A mission file from Budapest, years prior. A name scrubbed from the record, initials left behind, RK. A man who vanished mid-operation, presumed dead. That was the first time I felt the cold behind my ribs, but it wouldn't be the last. Headquarters never shouted about the blunder on Glienicke Bridge. Instead, they handed me the promotion. No sane officer coveted field validator for live defections. The notice arrived concealed inside a dog-eared pulp novel tossed on my bunk. Page 92 had been sliced open, and behind the paper, A strip of microfilm glinted like a silver splinter. 7 clipped words danced across the frame. Siemensdam S-Bahn, westbound platform 2100. Confirmed courier. Vanish. No signature, no seal, only the quiet assumption that I would obey. I burned the page in the ashtray, watched the letters twist into black lace, and wondered whether obedience was still the cost of survival. The lighter in my pocket once used for covert recordings felt heavier than the so-called reward. Berlin fog in February deletes the horizon and then works on your courage. By nightfall, the city sounded padded, every footstep muffled as if someone had wrapped the blocks in cotton. Sodium lamps bled pale halos across the platform, revealing travelers only for a breath before swallowing them again. I leaned against a timetable board that hadn't changed in months, cataloging silhouettes while pretending to read. My right hand nursed a British well rod hidden under my coat and serialized, appropriate for a man already lying to his own agency. The train screeched, coughed, and exhaled. Passengers drifted out like cautious ghosts. Last to appear was a man in a charcoal coat, carrying a leather suitcase, scarf pulled so high only his eyes showed. They were the same amused eyes I had seen on the bridge, eyes that knew the script better than I did. That doctrine demanded I intercept, verify, escort. Doctrine, however, was written by men who never felt fog crawl into their lungs. I stepped forward and offered the lighter that once recorded classified confessions. "You're late," I said, hoping routine would steady my pulse. He replied in accentless English, "You're early." 8 months earlier, that phrase had been the abort code during a Budapest dry run. He was either warning me the meat was blown or ordering me to blow it myself. Hesitation cracked open the moment. He boarded the rear carriage, doors hissed shut, and the train slipped away, taillights fading into vapor. My radio barked, "Validator, status check." I pressed the transmit bar and lied. Negative visual, heavy fog. Request extension. That was lie number 2 in 48 hours, and it tasted easier than the first. I spent the pre-dawn hours excavating the archives at Clayley, searching for any ghost who could mimic NATO protocols so cleanly. Most folders remained intact until the final sheet, which ended mid-sentence. Subject demonstrates advanced replication of command structures. Possibility of. The conclusion had been removed with surgical neatness. That part I never told anyone, not even her. I wrote a supplemental memo. Courier unconfirmed. Operation void due to environmental interference. In the margin, I asked myself the only honest question: who gains from keeping him in play? At sunrise, a telex rattled across my desk. Secure all Budapest files immediately. No copies. No courtesy of explanation. Maybe it wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was survival, someone else's. I photographed what remained, slid the film inside a hollow florin coin, and swallowed it with coffee, so bitter it scraped my throat. The metal settled in my gut like an overdue confession. I ordered a car. No driver came. Instead, a boy on a bicycle freewheeled to the curb, handed me a plain envelope, and vanished between delivery trucks. Inside was a fresh Polaroid of the clay pigeon range behind quiet Clayley and 4 words stamped in scarlet ink. Early MEAN's empty, WAIT. No sender, no instructions, just another contradiction stapled to my conscience. That's when I understood the true battlefield. Belief. If the courier was a phantom, he belonged to whoever believed in him hardest. At that moment, that wasn't Langley, and it sure as hell wasn't me. I pocketed the photo. A bell rang. I had been awake 24 hours yet felt no fatigue, only the certainty that someone was scripting my hesitation from the shadows across the street. I wondered whether the game had started days earlier, or if it had always been my life. But the worst was yet to come for us all. The door to the archives wasn't locked, but it should have been. It creaked open at 6:17, the same time the city's trams began winding down the Hauptstraße, and the same hour the janitor, an old Czech named Bodden, usually made his second pass with the mop. That morning, he never showed. I entered alone. Claylee's records room had the smell of damp paper, carbon dust, and secrets poorly buried. I scanned the tags until I found the drawer marked Budapest 195860, Cross Intelligence Coordination. The folder I remembered from my handler's briefing had vanished. In its place, a single beige jacket, thick, labeled only Red LC-7. Double quotes, not protocol. I opened it. Inside were decrypted reports from a dead drop station in Schultz-Talmantur files that hadn't been touched in 3 years. Pages smudged with fingerprints not listed on any of our internal logs. But what stopped me wasn't the format. It was the name, or lack of it, Operative K. No first name, no origin, no full clearance trail. Just a string of Cody names: Falcon, Mercury, Shadow. And one photo. Grainy, but familiar. The same amused eyes from the bridge, from the platform. It couldn't be coincidence. I stared at it like it might blink. Then I noticed something scribbled on the back, half erased in pencil. Confirmed dual node Budapest, Moscow. Unsanctioned contact. MI6, 1960. Possible triple protocol asset. Triple protocol. That wasn't real. It was a rumor, the kind whispered at 3A.M, in bugged bars and filed under conspiracy if spoken aloud. An operative allegedly cleared to work simultaneously for CIA, MI6, and KGB, none aware of the full deal. A human error, or a perfect weapon, depending on who told the story. I swallowed hard. If that was him, then no one was in control. Not Langley, not London, not Moscow. I copied the entire file onto microfilm. When I reached the exit, someone had left a chair pushed awkwardly in front of the camera in the hallway. A signal. That surveillance had been blind for at least 10 minutes, maybe more. I slipped the film behind the inner lining of my belt, stepped into the stairwell, and paused. Someone was on the landing above, just out of sight, breathing steady. Not moving. I didn't wait. I exited street level, turned twice down dead-end alleys, and reached my safe flat in Fridno before the hour turned. Inside, I ripped out the belt lining, tucked the film under the floorboard, and poured myself 2 fingers of Hungarian brandy imported off the books. Same bottle I kept from '59. I hadn't touched it in years. That night, I did. At 11:42, my line rang. No code, no static, just a flat voice. Stop looking into K, I said nothing. There was a click. That voice didn't sound American. Or Soviet. It sounded tired. Like mine. I filed the discovery as reference-only validation pending and marked it dormant. That meant no one else would see it unless I opened it again. I told myself I was protecting the chain of command. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to be the one who shouted fire in a room full of spies with gas cans. And yet, a question burned in my chest. If this man had played 3 sides, which one did he betray? Or worse, which one had I? That file should have stayed buried. But then again, so should I. You don't forget the name of a man you're told is dead. Especially not when he shows up alive in surveillance film, walking across Schwetterstraße like a man late for a haircut. Was in the debrief room at Claylee, thumbing through static shot negatives for a routine cross-border scan. The reel was dated 2 days after the S-Bahn incident, nothing urgent, or so they claimed. I scanned past frame after frame of vague silhouettes and East German guards with frozen faces until I froze too. He was there, wearing a brown overcoat and cap, face turned slightly toward the camera. The eyes were unmistakable, cold, analytical. There was a small tear at the shoulder seam of his coat. I remembered that coat because I'd seen it in a KGB funeral dossier in 1959. The subject, Major Yuri Rudenko, buried with honors after. Allegedly, falling from a fourth-story window during an interrogation in Leningrad. Now here he was, walking with a newspaper under his arm, like the resurrection had been rescheduled without our consent. I brought the reel to my superior at the station, James Becker, a man whose mustache had more clearance than most field agents. He waved it off after 3 frames. Photographic misidentification, poor light. I said the words out loud just to test them. They felt like syrup on gravel. He offered me a cigarette and closed the drawer. That was his version of a verdict. But I didn't let it go. That night I reviewed the footage again, frame by frame, then cross-referenced it with the declassified burial documentation. The height matched. So did the limp. Rudenko had shattered his left ankle in '57 after a car bomb intended for someone else. In the footage, he favors that ankle. You don't fake a limp like that unless you lived through it. At 3 o'clock, I called a former East Sector informant, code name Nail. He answered in Hungarian and cursed when he realized it was me. After a pause, he whispered, "If Rudenko walks again, someone is feeding ghosts." He hung up. I never heard from him again. Next morning, I found my desk drawer locked. I hadn't locked it. Inside, a single undeveloped photo print, Glienicke Bridge, shot from a strange angle like someone standing beneath it under the girders. In the center, 2 men in silhouette. One was me, the other had that same slouched walk, that same coat. There was no note, no threat, just the image. I stared at it for 20 minutes before I realized what it meant. They weren't warning me. They were testing me. A week later, I was reassigned to internal liaison duty, bureaucratic exile. No fieldwork, no contact chains. But I still had the film. I still had the eyes burned into memory. So I kept digging. And the more I dug, the more. I wondered, if Rudenko had never died, then what else had we buried under fabricated funerals and forged reports? How many ghosts did we invent just to make the silence easier to manage? Or worse, who were the ones indenting us? Kreuzberg always smelled like yesterday's coal and tomorrow's betrayals. The cafe on Zosiner Strage wasn't on any official map, but the sugar bowls were always full, and the windows fogged just enough to blur faces without raising suspicion. That afternoon, the street outside was wet from melting snow, and the sky hung low like a secret no one dared say out loud. He walked in wearing the same navy wool coat he wore during the Prague fallout, back when we both thought the BND was still on our side. Cody name? Adler? Real name? I don't think I ever knew it. He nodded to the waitress, sat across from me, and stirred his coffee twice before speaking. "You're asking too many questions, amigo," he said in English with a Munich accent. His eyes never lifted from the cup. "They're not yours to ask. I kept mine on the door. If Rudenko's walking again, somebody forgot to update the obituary." He finally looked at me, calm, detached, like a doctor informing a stranger about someone else's cancer. "Rudenko never stopped walking. You just stopped being allowed to look." Then he leaned forward, dropped his voice, and said something. "That still echoes. Someone inside your chain is feeding false intel. They want you confused, not dead, yet it wasn't a threat. It was worse, it was mercy." I stirred my tea out of habit. The sugar didn't dissolve. Maybe I didn't either. "Why tell me?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because you looked into the wrong eyes and didn't shoot. That buys you one favor." Then he stood, buttoned his coat, and dropped a napkin on the table before disappearing into the gray blur of Berlin. On the napkin, 4 words, underlined twice. Hawk, Clayally, Tuesday, alone. Alone. No initials. No date. Just that, like I was supposed to know what to do with it. I didn't, but I kept the napkin anyway. Still have it, yellowed and torn at the fold. That night, I tried to track Adler through BND channels. Nothing. No travel. Records, no clearance logs, no shadows cast. It was as if he'd never existed outside that booth. That made sense. In our line of work, presence is the exception. Disappearance is policy. Back in the safe flat, I unfolded every report I'd filed since the bridge. Read them like someone else wrote them. Language too clean, too rehearsed. Some of the phrases, non-confirmed contact, suspected decoy, fog obstruction, were lifted straight from training manuals. But I never wrote like that, not even on my worst day. Someone had rewritten my reports, or I had been reading their version all along. And that's when I realized the scariest part. Maybe this wasn't a conspiracy. Maybe it was a procedure. A slow removal of memory, voice by voice, edit by edit, until the story no longer belonged. To me, and Tuesday was coming fast. GLIENICKER Bruck was too quiet that night. No wind, no dogs barking from the east, not even the usual hum of the lights overhead. Just the sound of boots on wet stone and the dull breath of men pretending they weren't scared. The kind of quiet that didn't feel natural. It felt assigned. I'd been ordered to facilitate an exchange. An imprisoned Soviet engineer in our custody for someone supposedly held on their side. 1 for 1, they said. Simple trade. But nothing in Berlin was ever simple, especially not under the ironed pleasantries of Cold War diplomacy. I stood mid-bridge, flanked by 2 armed escorts, and a man I'd only met hours earlier thin, trembling, reeking of engine grease and fear. His file had arrived that morning, delivered by hand from Langley. No name, just a Cody name. Sparrow. Allegedly defected from a Soviet nuclear program. Allegedly valuable. Allegedly everything. On the east side, 2 silhouettes approached. 1 uniform, 1 civilian. When they stopped 20 feet short of the line, the uniform called out something. In Russian. One of our guards replied in textbook phonetics. I caught only 1 word clearly. Podmana. Swap. We waited. And waited. No one crossed. Then the civilian turned, walked back toward the east, and vanished into the fog. That's when I knew. Something was wrong. Sparrow looked at me, eyes wide, lips trembling. Why ? Why didn't they take me? He asked in broken English. I had no answer. The Soviets left with nothing. We stood there with our package, our lies, and our silence. 10 minutes later, a message came through. Exchange failed. Return asset to safe house. Back in the van, I stared at Sparrow. He wouldn't stop shaking. Said he was promised asylum. Said he had secrets to trade. Said he had met Redinkle last year. I asked where. He whispered, not Berlin, Caracas. That stopped everything. We didn't include that detail in the report. The handler in charge told me to leave that part out, uncorroborated, unstable testimony. But I remember how Sparrow said it, calm, certain, like someone who knew. And that meant Rudenko wasn't just alive, he was operational. And worse, off-continent. When we returned to the safe house, they separated me from Sparrow. Side debrief would come later. I knew what that meant. I wasn't going to see him again. I was right. By morning, the safe house was cleared. No files. No recordings. No sign of him ever being there. Except for one thing. My lighter. Left on the floor. Open. Dead. Die. Picked it up and checked the tape inside. Nothing. Just hiss. Which meant either the microphone had failed, or someone didn't want me hearing what came after that whisper. I lit a cigarette anyway, even though I'd quit. And I wondered, what if we were never meant to get anything in return? What if he was the delivery? And what if we just accepted a Trojan horse? No horse, just hollow. That night, for the first time, I started locking the inside of my own flat. And I slept with one eye open, because something had come through that bridge, and it wasn't him. They told me the safe house was secure, triple-checked, bug-swept, soundproofed, to NATO specs. The kind of place where secrets either lived forever or died on tape. I knew better. Berlin didn't do secure, it did temporarily unwatched. I was assigned to extract testimony from Sparrow after the failed bridge. Exchange. A standard sit-down, 2 chairs, 1 desk, no clocks. I brought coffee I wouldn't drink and a lighter that wasn't just for show. The mic hidden inside had recorded confessions, bribes, blackmail hell, once even a KGB major's rendition of Sinatra after 3 vodkas. It had never failed me, until that night. Sparrow sat across from me, hands folded like he was waiting for a priest, not an agent. He didn't ask where he was or why, just stared at the wall. Then he said it. There's a man they call Grey Hawk, operates inside MI6. Been there since '58. My hand slid toward my belt, touched the activation button on the lighter. 1 click. Recording started. Supposedly. He went on. Cody name. Originated in Budapest. They think he passed the neutron chain specs to Moscow and blocked the leak trace back to Langley. They only caught on when he shifted targets Latin American cells. Rudenko trained him. I raised an eyebrow. Trained him how? Not how. Why? Greyhawk doesn't sabotage projects. He chooses which ones survive. I nodded slowly, pretending. Calm. The lighter hummed in my pocket. Or so I thought. He leaned forward. You're not safe. He's not after assets. He's after influence. The kind that rewrites policy. And he already has someone inside your channel. The door buzzed someone, calling from the hall. I stood, slipped the lighter into my coat, and opened the door. No one there. When I returned, Sparrow was silent again. And then he started laughing. Quiet at first, then dry and bitter, like sandpaper rubbing on bone. You think you're the one doing the questioning? He asked, eyes locked onto mine. You're just another room he's already furnished. That's when I knew something was off. I ended the session early. Didn't report what he said. Instead, I ran straight to the tech room. Pulled the lighter apart myself. No tape. Just an empty reel. Not blank missing. The recorder hadn't malfunctioned. It had been swapped. And that meant one of 2 things. Either someone had gotten to the device before me, or someone knew exactly what he was going to say and didn't want it on record. Filed a dummy report. Subject uncooperative. No intel. Recovered. Recommend repatriation or detainment review. Later that night, I placed the lighter back on the same desk in the same room, just in case they were still listening. And for hours, I just let it sit there, listening to nothing, like I'd been doing for years. But something, Sparrow said, wouldn't leave me. You're just another room he's already furnished. And I started wondering if my silence had always belonged to someone else. The envelope arrived at the dead drop on Grillitzer Strage. No stamp, no return address. Just my initials typed clean across the front in faded courier font. I almost didn't open it, not out of fear, but out of recognition. That font wasn't just old. It was personal. Last time I saw it was during the Cyprus-Pack Channel in '59. The man who typed those letters was dead. Or so I thought. Inside, a single page, no greeting. 1 line, center aligned, typed in German. Der Grau Falk fliegt noch. The Grey Hawk still flies. Below it, a list of dates, some familiar, others not. My birthday was on there. The day I graduated the farm. The date Sparrow whispered Caracas. And one date I didn't recognize. June 12, 1961. Circled twice. I didn't know it then, but that was the day Radinko was spotted near Victoria Station allegedly on MI6 payroll. The letter was unsigned, but there was something else. A watermark barely visible when I held it to the window. Not a logo and image. A falcon. No wings spread. Perched. Watching. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't report the note. I didn't destroy it either. I folded it 3 times, sealed it inside the lining of my trench coat, and carried it like a loaded gun I had no license for. That night, I visited a colleague, former French liaison, code name La Serre. She owed me favors, the kind you don't record. I handed her the list and asked one question. Has this ever been mapped? She scanned it, paused at the circled date, and nodded. These aren't just dates, she said. They're activations. Look, she opened a worn notebook filled with surveillance notes. Cross-referenced some logs I'd never seen. 4 of the dates matched known defection attempts that failed under suspicious circumstances. Another matched the day a NATO official vanished during a Geneva conference. Only one name popped up more than once, buried in the logistics data, Grey Hawk. But there was a catch. Every time he was mentioned, it was in context to someone else's. Voice, never direct, always hearsay, always unconfirmed. A ghost made of citations. We spent the night pulling threads until they frayed. And somewhere near dawn, La Serre said something I'd been trying not to think. What if Grey Hawk isn't one man? She poured another drink, hands shaking just slightly. What if it's a designation? A position, not a person? It made a kind of sense that only espionage could allow. Shifting identity, one handler to the next, same mission, same code, no face. That would explain the inconsistencies, the contradictions. The way Sparrow spoke with certainty, like he knew him, but couldn't describe him. I left before sunrise, took the long way home, turning corners I didn't need to, watched shadows that didn't move like pedestrians. At the flat, my coat was still warm from the walk. The letter still tucked inside. And on the back of my door, scrawled in pencil, June 12th never ended. I didn't sleep that night. Still Haven single quotes T. It started with a drawer that didn't open right. Not jammed, rearranged. I kept my field reports in that drawer, handwritten notes before typing them up for the archive. I always used black ink. I always signed bottom left. That morning, the latest one was missing. In its place was a copy typed, formatted, with the same content. Almost. The section about the safe house session with Sparrow was edited. The phrase Grey Hawk had been replaced with unverified Soviet asset. The reference to MI6? Gone. The part about Radinko? Sanitized, reworded into a vague timeline inconsistency, passed off as agent confusion. And the signature at the bottom wasn't mine. Not forged. Just ... not there, no name. No accountability. No trace. I went straight to records control. Asked for the tape from the lighter recorder, citing standard chain of custody protocol. The clerk, wet behind the ears, nervous, fumbled for the ledger. You already signed it out, he said. I hadn't. He showed me the log. My name. Date. Stamped 307, the night of the exchange. Signature looked like mine, but off. Like someone who had studied my handwriting too carefully. That's when I understood. It wasn't just deletion. It was replacement. Someone wasn't hiding evidence. They were building a new version of it. I left the office and walked to the canal. Sat on a bench near where Sparrow first mentioned Caracas. Whined off the water, cold enough to bite through wool. I lit a cigarette with a match. The lighter stayed. In my pocket, empty now, symbolic. A young courier passed me on a bike. Nothing unusual, until he slowed just slightly and dropped a folded newspaper at my feet. Inside, on page 7, buried between oil prices and a chess column, was a small classified ad. K seeks silence. Will pay in absence. No repeats. I tore it out. Not because I feared it, but because I recognized it. It was code from a retired signal book used by Operation Red Mark buried after Prague, never public. Only 6 agents ever learned it. 4 were dead. 1 was me. The last? I'd thought him compromised in 61. Now I wasn't so sure. I returned to the safe flat. The door was locked, the lights untouched. But the scent of old cologne mine, but stronger, hung in the air. On my typewriter, the same report, reprinted, a red slash through my name. That night, I didn't sleep. I copied everything by hand, 3 versions. 1 I mailed to Langley, 1 to a storage locker in Zurich, and the last I burned. Sometimes I think we were all just disposable pieces in someone else's rewrite. And in that moment, watching the smoke rise, I realized maybe we were never telling the story. Maybe we were just characters in it. They called it Operation Lantern, a last-ditch effort to track down the defector I'd seen on Glennecker Bridge. Weeks after the failed exchange, Langley greenlit a sweep in Leipzig. Just enough urgency to feel real. Just enough budget to keep it quiet. They told me to pack light and forget Berlin for a while. I didn't argue. You don't say no to a ghost. Hunt if you suspect the ghost is watching. We hit Leipzig under diplomatic cover. 6 agents, 4 local assets. 1 too many suitcases. The man we were hunting had no confirmed name, no known safe house, no verified contacts. But someone kept planting sightings. A clerk at the rail station claimed to see him boarding a train to Dresden. A hotel porter swore he'd checked in under a Czech passport. Each report ended the same way. No footage, no fingerprints, no exit stamp dot. It was like chasing footprints in melting snow. Midweek, I interviewed a bookseller near the old quarter contact of a contact. She said a man had come in asking for French novels in Russian translation. Odd, but not damning. Until she added, he asked for volume 2 of The Possessed. That volume doesn't exist. It never did. That was a code. Back in '58, The Possessed Volume 2 was a challenge phrase used in joint Anglo-American missions. The correct reply were all just borrowed names. I whispered that back to her. She blinked twice. Ben said he had gray eyes, very polite, but he didn't speak like a Russian. I left her a transmitter hidden in a book spine and told her to contact me if he returned. She never did. Back at HQ, the sweep team was restless. Nothing to show for 10 days except expenses and empty rooms. One night, I found 2 of our own playing cards over a printout of my original report, the one that had been altered. They stopped when I entered. The older one asked, "Why does this guy matter? So much to you?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know anymore. The operation was called off on a Tuesday. No capture, no contact. Just a memo. Defector likely misidentified. Case closed pending further intel. But the moment I landed back in Berlin, I knew something had shifted, that my flat had been entered discreetly. The rug was angled wrong. The drawer stuck again. Inside, a new copy of the Leipzig mission file. But this one had a different title. Training Simulation Debrief. Field Stress Test. As if it had all been theater. As if the entire chase had been a test of me. I scanned the appendix. Last page, 1 line. Subject responded as expected. No leak detected. I stared at that sentence for a long time, because I didn't remember being the subject, and I certainly wasn't briefed about. Any test dot So I asked myself again, what if the real defector had never existed? What if I was the variable, and Leipzig was just another mirror, held up to measure what I wouldn't say? Or worse, what I would dot in 1983, they brought me back to Langley for what they called a quiet consultation. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a flight, a car, and a long hallway I hadn't walked in over a decade. I recognized the carpet pattern before I remembered the names of the men waiting for me. The meeting room smelled like chlorine and politics. 2 flags in the corner, blinds half drawn. They gave me coffee too bitter to be an accident and slid a manila folder across the table. No greeting, no eye contact. Just, we'd like your assessment. Inside, 4 photos. First one, standard. Redinko, 1957. Military ID shot. Familiar to the point of useless. Second, Glienicke Bridge, 1962. Grainy, angled, time-stamped. I was in it. Third, the interior of a reception hall, curtains pulled back, champagne glasses mid-toast, a chandelier reflected on polished marble. The center of the frame showed a man in a dark suit, holding a cigar, balding, smiling. Fourth, the same man, but labeled Viktor Karmelov. Trade attach, Caracas. Taken 1982. I looked at it for a long time because I knew that smile. Same lips. Same eyes. It was Rudenko. Different name. New country. Same ghost. Where did this come from? I asked. They didn't answer. One of them, a younger analyst with 2 clean hands, simply said, "Do you believe this proved Rudenko survived?" I gave a bitter laugh. I believe that in 1962, you just filed it as insufficient. Another leaned forward. "Would you be willing to amend your prior reports?" That's when I understood. This wasn't a debrief. It was a rewrite. They wanted me to go back on record and call my own reports unreliable. Dismiss the sightings. Walk back the bridge. The train, the interview with Sparrow. Erase it all. I asked why the room stayed quiet. Then one of them said, too casually, because Rudenko's cooperation is now classified under treaty. Treaty. I felt the bottom drop out of 30 years of memory. They'd flipped him. At some point, maybe even before the exchange, they decided Rudenko was more useful alive than dead. And everything that followed, the failures, the false hunt, the manipulated files, they weren't accidents. They were insulation. And I had been part of the padding. I stood, left the folder untouched, said nothing. No one stopped me. That was the part that burned the most. Outside, I sat on the steps of the parking structure, lit a cigarette with my dead lighter, and watched traffic flow like time refusing to stop. That was the last time Langley called me, but not the last time I saw his face, because the next year, in Madrid, I passed a man reading The Possessed in French at a cafe. Volume 2. He never looked up. He didn't have to. It took me 30 years to open the file again. The one they declassified last spring by accident or design. I still don't know. It arrived in a plain envelope with a smiley face sticker on the corner, like a joke no one remembered how to laugh at. Inside, the dossier was thin, too thin. A summary page, a few redacted memos, and one photograph printed in color, grainy. At the edges, the bridge, me, and the man walking past me, suitcase in hand, his back to the camera. Even now, they won't put his name on record. The final page was blank. Just the government stamp and the words, "No further documentation available." That was a lie, because I remember what I did, saw him. He looked me in the eye. He slowed his pace. He gave me a chance, and I let him pass. Not because I failed, not because I hesitated, but because something in me, something I still can't name, decided to let him go. Sometimes I think I recognized something in him, Sometimes, I think he recognized something in me. And maybe that's why I never stopped carrying the guilt. Because I didn't just let a Soviet agent walk. I let a story walk. One no one else could tell. One no one wanted told. Not Langley. Not Moscow. Not even me. I've written this down now, every thread I could trace. Every silence I learned to keep. And I know it won't change anything. Most of the people involved are dead. Or worse, retired. But this is the part they never erased. It's the last page. And I'm signing it, finally, with no clearance, no stamp. No handler. Just the truth I couldn't carry to the grave. Maybe now it can carry me. Sometimes. I wonder if anyone else ever saw that look in his eyes. The one that said, "You know why I'm here. And why you'll let me go." And the worst part is, he was right. Before this fades from memory entirely, hit subscribe if any of this even makes sense anymore. Leave a comment with what you think happened at that bridge.